Conversations with Richard Fidler on ABC Local Radio.
Hello, good morning. Today it's my conversation with Victor Bray. Victor's a third-generation tomato farmer from Queensland and a pretty successful one. He and his dad even managed to breed a whole new variety of tomato. But there's more to his story than just tomatoes, because Victor Bray is better known for strapping himself into extremely high-powered vehicles and hurtling along a track at world record-breaking speeds, going up to 390 kilometres per hour. Victor Bray has held world records again and again in international drag racing, and he's one of the most popular figures in motorsport today. So today you'll take a trip into the world of door slammers, alcohol funny cars, and smoking back-wheel barbecue. And Victor does also make a fine tomato too. When I spoke to him at the beginning of this year, Victor was nursing his latest motorsport injury. He'd lost the tip of one of his fingers.
Yeah, mate, it was a sad story, actually. We're down there setting up for Bathurst last year. We go down there and do some demonstrations in our, what we call our burnout cars, and I was helping a mate of mine, the stunt motorbike guys down there, Matt Mingo and the boys. I was helping them set up their merchandise trailer. We'd got ours set up, walked over and give him a hand. He pulled up a fold-away counter inside his merchandise trailer and cut the enemy finger off, which absolutely destroyed my weekend.
I don't want to laugh at that, but I'm sorry, but it does seem ironic that, you know, so dangerous is motorsport that even setting up a tent you can lose a finger.
Yeah, you know, being a farmer, hanging around machinery all my life, drag racing, and one of my mates cuts my finger off, so good on him.
Good on
I
him.
call him Chopper. Chopper Mingo.
Victor, you're often described as a top door slammer. What is a door slammer?
I suppose anyone that's been to the drags, I suppose at drag racing, the most well-known car out there is the Top Fuel Drags, is the long skinny one with the engine behind you. Driver sits in front of the engine. They're probably the most seen one. Then you've got the funny cars, which are they call them funny cars. They started off as a basic shape of a car and ended up with the aerodynamics just gone crazy on them, and they look funny, so they just call them funny cars.
They're like the Ed Big Daddy Roth cartoons, are they? The ones with a gigantic sort of hulking body and
yeah, but they're
hanging off
made for drag like that. The motors hang out through the bonnet, but the cars are very, very sleek. Like, you know, instead of having headlights raised at the front, they flatten all that down. They do 300 mile an hour funny cars, so they fly over 500k. So I mean, you know, those things have to be very aerodynamic, and that's the sport of drag racing is about losing the drag. And when you come to the door slammers, they're the only bracket, the only class or category in drag racing that the rule book states you must have opening and closing doors on both sides of the car, and the driver's not allowed to sit in the middle. He must sit off to one side, and the car must have operating suspension. So basically, we're the only class in there that runs the top engines in the car, which are supercharged alcohol-burning engines around 3,000 horsepower, and you must have the doors that open and shut. And the nickname in the sport is door slammers. And
so that's the car that's going to most closely resemble something you see on the street, in other words, or the V8 supercars or something like
definitely.
that.
Well, ANDRA, that's the Australian National Drag Racing Association. They sanction our sport and they run the rules, and they very, very conscientiously ensure that the vehicles, I mean, I'd race a 57 Chevy, and my son Ben races a Monaro, so his has to look like a Monaro, even though it's got all the aerodynamic packaging required to do 400k, and mine has to look like a 57 Chevy, but it's got to have the aerodynamic package to be safe at 400k. So when they designed the 57 Chevys, that wasn't foremost in their mind.
So why drive that kind of car as opposed to these funny cars or the dragsters and the other kind of cars?
Most of my mates would be out there laughing right now. I'm a bigger guy, and they say, what's your answer to that, Vic? The simple answer is I don't fit in the other ones. So, no, we have run them over the years, but I just love the 57 Chevys. I'm really a street car guy, you know, got a lot of street machines and cruise cars and 58 Chevy lowrider and convertibles, and I had a 57 Chevy street car, and I suppose once I sort of started drag racing, I was sort of racing at off-street events at Surfers Paradise like 25 years ago in my street car, and just got a reputation. Love the 57 and just stuck with that design and shape.
It's a more comfortable vehicle to be in, I suppose.
I just like them. I just like the shape of them. I mean, there's door slammers. That's the beauty of them. do resemble old Studebakers, old Ford custom lines. You know, they've got Mercuries. The 50s and 60s style cars are really what Door Slam is about. And that's why they're such a fan favourite, because the public can come there and they can actually have a look at the cars. They know what that car is. I mean, funny cars might go really, really fast, but I bet you there ain't too many people on the hill know exactly what sort of car that was. They just know it's a funny car, whereas our cars, that's a Door Slam, that's a 57, that's a Studebaker, that's a Monaro, and even though they're flash looking, they go fast and they look like the car.
Victor, it's obviously a very serious business what you do, and you have to make sure everything is exactly right, and you have to be terribly grown up about the whole thing. But is the pleasure of it is it like a little kid's pleasure? Does it make you feel like a little kid? It's that pleasure because it's noise and smell and speed and all those things that we love when we're kids.
There's probably two parts to drag racing. The first thing is, like you say, I don't know if it's kids thing. It's the excitement of it. The excitement of being involved in a car with that much power and the adrenaline rush of getting in there and opening the throttle and knowing that this thing, you've barely got control of the car, you know. So, and that's one side of it for sure. You're building them and the mechanics is that side of it, you know what I mean? It's the interesting side of the sport. And then you've got the competitive side, like in any sport, you know, where when you get to the racetrack, you've built the car, you've got to the track. It's such a psych up getting in the car, driving the car and all the rest of it. But really, it turns into a very competitive sport. And drag races are actually won and lost by 10,000ths of a second. So we have extraordinarily accurate timing equipment, and there's a reaction time, which the driver is how fast from when the green light comes on to you've actually reacted and got the car to move to touch that beam, and then there's how fast you go down the track. So there's a lot in it, and it is that competitive side that makes the most attraction once you've been in the sport for a long time. But if it wasn't for the mechanical side of it, as far as building engines, putting them together, even though sometimes it gets a little bit monotonous when you've got to do a lot in a hurry, or when you beat your stuff up pretty bad, but with a blow up or something, it's probably is the two sides. But yeah, there's definitely that side where this is just exciting and this is fun, and messing with this stuff's just unbelievable. You know, being able to walk in your workshop and see a supercharger and a big set of heads and some fat tyres and that, yeah, you know, we just see it as a bunch of fun.
The reason why I ask is because, you know, when you go on like those hugely terrifying rides at theme parks.
I don't go on.
Well, no, I don't either. But
you'll find not many drag races do go on them.
That feeling you get when you go on a wild ride like that, yeah. The excitement of it tends to shear away all your adult sophistication and all your self-possession, and you're a screaming kid in that moment, and that's the pleasure of that instant. I wanted to ask you, just take me through moment by moment what happens getting into the car itself. What happens as you're getting into the car?
Obviously, the vehicles we race, there's an enormous amount of safety aspects have to be adhered to. What you do, you have your crew there. Each car has probably 6 or 7 crew guys. When we're about to go, because of we wear 9-layer fire suits, which give you about 30 seconds to a minute of safety.
9 layers?
Yeah, 9 layers of Nomex. It's a anti-burn material.
9 different suits, you mean?
9 layers in the one suit.
Okay.
Yeah. And what we do is when we go out to the track, they're very, very hot, by the way, and when you go out on the racetrack, we figure if you have a fire and something's bad and there's a fire crew at the start line, in the middle of the track and at the finish line, and you've got 30 seconds to a minute before you cook up in these suits if you're in an intensive fire, and it takes them less than that 30 seconds to catch up with you and they're highly trained to put the fire out before that. They know how much time you got, but obviously it's up to us to stop and get out of the car, or stop the car if you're lucid to get close to the fire crew so they can get the car out fast. So you got your fire suit on, you got your fire boots on, and your over boots. We run another boot over the top of our boots. And anyway, you imagine a fire. If you're sitting in an open cockpit, and in a funny car, for argument's sake, you've got a big fire in front of you, and it's blowing on you. Well, everything's doubled up that gets the fire first. You know, the helmet, the front of your boots, and all the rest of it. So, because that's the stuff that's going to be really impounded in the fire. So you got the fire side of it, and neck braces and stuff for protection, and obviously seat belts, massive seat belts. 6-point seat belts that strap in. So basically, you get into the car, and you got your helmet on and your neck brace on, and the crew pulls the seat belts up, and they pull them up uncomfortably tight.
Trussed up like a turkey in the thing, then, are you?
You're very.
Really tight.
It's daunting. There's no doubt about it. I mean, some people might be very comfortable with it. I don't know, but it's daunting to myself. I've been doing it now for 25 years, and when I get in and get strapped in and until that car starts up, you're still a little bit, wriggling the old neck around a bit. It's a little bit uncomfortable, I can tell you, but it's just how it has to be. I mean, there's not a lot of room in there, and especially for me being a bigger guy, you're in the car, you're strapped in tight, steering wheel's right where it has to be, all the pedals are right where they have to be, and everything's right there. You've got parachute levers, and first thing you do, I suppose, you get in the car, you get strapped in, you check that everything's in the right place, And then you just make sure you're a little bit comfortable, go through these, is the car right? You're sitting there waiting. I suppose that's the nervous period from the minute that you've finished doing that till you're waiting to fire the car up.
Now, once you've fired the car up, what's that moment like? Because suddenly
it don't matter no
massive
more. Nothing matters anymore.
Really?
You're in a new mode. Before, I suppose you could call it worried, concerned, scared, whatever. When you first jump in the car and strap yourself in, you feel that you feel adrenaline, I mean, you're sitting in this missile. You've got an engine you can't see the top of the engine through the windscreen. The supercharger hangs out through the bonnet and you cannot see the top of the engine. You've got belts flicking around there. You've only got about, probably at the very most, 10 or 12 inches of windscreen height, and the supercharger's taking up all of that, and you've got a little bit on one side you can see. So
you're like Wile E. Coyote, who's strapped himself to the front of an Acme missile with the burning fuse on one hand. Close.
The only people I've ever sort of looked at, I was over in the States, and those guys that used to strap themselves in the top of them rockets and go to the moon in the 60s, I think they were a little bit worse than some of the boys that we do. But so, we strap ourselves in the car, and then the second that engine starts, concern goes out the window. You have to do your job, and you have to do your job properly. A, you could cause yourself a lot of engine damage. B, you've got to win the race eventually, so we'll get all your shift points right. You've got to leave at the right RPM, take your foot off the clutch at the right time, flatten at the right time, make all your shifts at the right time, pull the parachutes at the right time, which is always a good one. And, so there's a time, as soon as the engine starts, and most drag races, I think will tell you this, that's the time that's the fun bit,
And once the engine has started, Victor, it's so loud, isn't it? And you
Extremely.
Feel it.
You feel the whole car's vibrating massively. The helmet's actually worn out a lot of the sound. So once you start the car, the crew plays really very little part in it. They still instruct you on the start line, and the starter that runs the racetrack, they instruct you on the start line, but that's you. You've got complete control of everything. No one's allowed to touch the car.
My guest in conversation at the moment is Victor Bray. Victor is an international drag racing champion who's held several world records and is one of the most popular figures in the sport of drag racing. So you've started it, and then drag racers then do burnouts, don't they, Victor? They do burnouts.
So now we're having fun.
Now you're having fun. But it's not about having fun, the burnouts. It's done for a reason, isn't it?
Absolutely not. The burnout, I mean, they say about 5 or 6 seconds at about 8,000 revs is what it needs to create the right amount of temperature in the tyres. The drag racing slicks are developed. They've got big balloon walls on them. They're very, very soft. So when you take off, the tread grabs the track, and it's got a bit of give between there and the rim. So, you've got to heat them up to the certain temperature. We'll take one step back. First of all, the racetrack surface has to be prepared very, very well. So the track surface has to be clean for a starter, no dust, dirt, stones or anything on it. Then they spray a compound, we call it VHT. It basically allows the rubber off the tyres when you're doing the burnout to stick to the racing surface. And then so we're actually racing on a rubberised surface. So we've got rubber tyres, racing on a rubber surface. We do our burn. The track obviously has temperature in it. Our preferred temperature is, I don't know what it is in centigrade, but because of American sport drag race, we're talking 75 to about 90 degrees is about what we look at for track temperature, ideal track temperature. You do your burnout and you back up, and then your tyres are obviously clean, they're warm, the track's clean, warm, rubberised, and that's your best possible takeoff.
Rubberised? Are you saying you actually coat the track with your tyre rubber?
Absolutely, yeah. The whole racetrack is actually coated. They drag rubber up and down, old drag slicks. They've got a piece of equipment that they drag behind the tractor with weight on it, and they actually rub rubber into the racetrack. So even though the track is actually bitumen and concrete, you're actually racing on a rubberised surface that's been treated with this VHT product, which allows the rubber to stick to the surface successfully, so when you take off it doesn't peel up.
So then you've got to pull up to the starting line.
Yeah, you pull up to the starting line. The drag racing Christmas tree is something that takes a fair bit of getting used to. When you first pull up, if anyone ever been to the races, you've got 2 lights on top of the tree. One light, let's just deal with one lane. You slowly edge forward. Your crew bring you within a foot, or they're supposed to bring you within a foot. Sometimes they get you within 3 feet, but they bring you up to there about a foot away. Then you roll through till the top light comes, and that's called the pre-stage light. That means you're exactly 9 inches away from where you have to be when you race. So you come up there, the pre-stage light's on, then you check your belts are right, you check you're in the right gear, check everything's fine. Okay, then you let the other guy come into pre-stage as well. So both cars are in pre-stage now. So you both know that you're within 9 inches of that. And then there's rules. I mean, you've got time. You're not allowed to mess people around at this point. And you're in the hands of the starter. So your crew's out of it, you're out of it, you've got complete control of the car. And the only person that can stop the race at this stage is the starter if he sees something wrong with the racetrack or something.
So in a race, how many people will often be lined up at the
Just
start
2.
line? Just 2, is it?
Just 2. There is a track in America now that's got 4, but they haven't run it as a 4-race track yet. So.
Is it just too dangerous to have too many cars travelling that fast?
It's too dangerous to have 2 cars. Sometimes, I mean, they said they hit each other sometimes. It's shocking. when it happens. But I mean, you're basically having elimination, so you're racing against your opposition, your opponent,
So when something like the Bathurst event, that's like a marathon, what you're involved in is sprinting over a straight, short distance?
Drag races run over 400 metres, and we have timing increments. We have a Christmas tree, which we call a Christmas tree, which is the lights that instigate the start. And they have a lot of timing equipment, like infrared timing equipment that works off the tyre of the car. And then you have one of them at 60 feet, so we get a time out to 60 foot down the track. You have another piece of timing equipment at 330 feet, another piece at 660 feet, which is half track, which we also get a mile an hour at. Then you have 1,000 feet, and then you get the end of the racetrack, which is 400 metres or 1,320 feet. That is the length of the drag race. That's how it's 2 lanes wide. The lane's 6 to 8 metres wide. And then you have the finish line is at the end of the racetrack. So why we want those increments as we go down the racetrack, we want to know where the car's fast and where the car's not fast. That's how we tune the car. And the ability of the driver to get the car moving. See, when you're actually staged, we'll go back to the Christmas tree now. When you're sitting in pre-stage, you got your 2 top lights on, then you move the car forward into stage, and it's just known between the races. You don't mess the other guy around much. Some do, some don't, So you pull both cars into stage. That means that there's infrared beam on the ground, you've broken it, and you've accepted the start. So when the other guy bumps his in and your two stage lights are on, the starter sometime in the next 7 seconds, and it's not known to the driver. He does it when he feels like it, so no one can anticipate the start. He'll there press the button.
Oh, right. So it's not. So we can go dink, 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 and then when the go signal happens, that can happen at any time.
That can happen any time from 1 to 7 seconds.
Do you floor it? Do you actually just put right down to the
just like your manual streetcar, mate? You're holding the revs up high, very, very high. Nowadays we hold the revs up at about 6,800 revs, 7,000 revs, and which is probably about 1,000 rev higher than your average streetcar actually revs to. We leave at those RPM.
And does your back wheel immediately have traction, or is it spinning on the spot for
depends on the racetrack on the day. The best, fastest runs are when the track's good, the car and the tyre's good, and the race car chassis set up properly, and you get a bit of tyre spin. We call it tyre speed. You want a little bit of tyre speed early, not much, just enough to get the car, free the car up and let it get going. And that's when it goes the fast. Hard to do. That's the trick.
And when it does get going, what's happening to you in the driver's seat, the cockpit? Do you suddenly feel this inertia?
Oh, yeah. Well, when they take off fast. I mean, they take off super fast. Our car's accelerated just over 3 Gs.
3 Gs?
3 Gs. That's in our door slammers. They're probably one of the heaviest cars with the top alcohol motors in them.
What happens to your face?
I don't know.
Your cheeks flap? They do in one of those the centrifuges they have for astronauts?
Yeah, it probably does. But, I mean, we've got full-face helmets on, so no one would know. We have had cameras in the car. But, I mean, you take off in low gear and you've got to shift 3 gears on the run. And you've got to rev it up, and then you've got to take your foot off the clutch and flatten it at the same time. And that is a big trick in drag racing. I mean, we call it swapping the feet. You've got your foot on the clutch, you're holding the revs up to where you want to leave at, which is pretty high. And then the way that you swap the feet, the way that you, in your own head, and this is thousandths of a second, the brilliance you've got at getting that foot down first and giving the engine a bit of a run at the clutch, and then lifting your foot off the clutch, it's all going to happen instantly, but the rate that happens is a good difference between a good driver and a bad driver.
So how the feet flip over
how
in
they
the pedaling
flip over, swapping the feet.
Absolutely crucial.
Absolutely
because you're talking
crucial.
about thousandths of a second.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousandths of a second can make all the difference.
Yeah.
And once you're rocketing down the track, reaching your speeds, I hope I got that right, of up to 390
That's 400k. They
400 Ks?
Yeah.
I just wonder what that's like to see. When you're flying that fast in a plane, you don't get a sense of the horizon. Because
you get a sense of it in our cars.
Yeah, so having the horizon rush up at you at that speed, it must be a deeply thrilling moment, Victor.
I've had people in the car, V8 supercar drivers, and I've had a couple of world champion Wayne Gardner in the car. I've had other people in the car over the years, and their first assumption of leaving the start line and driving off down the racetrack. I mean, I've done it, thousands, probably tens of thousands of times over the last 30 years. Whereas these guys get in the car, and the first thing they say is, "What's going on for the first couple of seconds? We can't make out anything." But after a couple of runs, people that get in the car, and new drivers say that as well. But after a couple of runs, things get easier, and your mind seems to be able to grab it. It just happens so fast. I don't know people have asked me that question 100 times, and I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the racetrack, and I'm making sure I'm getting my job done because I'm busy, But a car that's not going down the racetrack well will what we call shake the tyres, which means that the slicks are so big they're trying to actually drive over themselves. They're trying to accelerate too fast, what the track's allowing them to do, and we call it tyre shake. It's the worst thing in drag racing. It actually knocks drivers out, tears chassis bars out of cars. But if it's not doing, if you're on a good clean run and the car's driving straight down the racetrack, they're nice cars to drive. They go down the racetrack and your shift light comes on. We have a light that tells us what revs to shift at. Shift light comes on, shift the gear, shift light there comes, shift the gear and go down there. Parachute's got to be out before you get to the end of the track so that they blossom under power and you pull up. And when everything goes 100% perfect, they're nice. They're so much fun. They just, putting one of them in top gear, you're doing 220 mile an hour. You put it into top gear, and it's just like a bus whacking you from behind. That's how fast it goes, It's just unbelievable feeling. Like the cars are so quick. They're just so fast. It's just unbelievable how fast they are.
Champion drag racer Victor Bray is my guest at the moment. Victor, what's going through your mind? You say while you're driving, while you're in that moment travelling down the track, you've got a lot of things you've got to be keeping in mind. You've got to do this, change gears, all that. But while that's actually happening, are you sort of in your own mind, or are you sort of standing out of your own mind watching yourself?
No, I feel like I'm in the car watching. See, it doesn't always go right. That's the trick. It doesn't always go right. And sometimes the thing will get out a bit and head for the wall, or spin on a bit of a loose pate on the track, or you've made the setup a little bit wrong and the car will start wheel standing, or you've got to be real ready all the time for. There's 100 different things can go wrong. The guy on the other lane might be coming over towards you, or the car just smoked the tyres off the start line, and obviously there's engine damage and stuff you've got to be careful of. But you're
running on pure instinct at that point, aren't you?
I would say that's probably what is instinct and experience. Yeah, you probably if something goes wrong, you need to be. I've got this favourite saying I've had, and I've instilled it into Ben and other guys that I've taught how to drive. And you obviously push your throttle down with your ankle. And I tell people, remember that human beings have their ankles hinged, and you can lift your foot off the throttle at any time. And that's the law of the land out there. It gets dangerous. And if you desperately need to win a race, you might take some extra risk as far as getting back on it. But these things, when they're going right, it's 3,500 horsepower. Controlled, but once something goes a little bit out of whack, it's not controlled anymore. So the horsepower, the clutches that we use actually slip and burn up about 2,000 horsepower off the line. Then we slowly bring them in as we go down the racetrack. No car in the world can leave the start line with 3,500 horsepower. It's impossible. It will not happen.
And once you cross the line up to, what did you say, about 400 metres or thereabouts?
400 metres exactly, yeah.
A parachute kicks in.
We got to pull the parachutes.
What does that mean?
We just pull a lever inside the car. Some people have them on air buttons. My car's just got cables, and you got to.
So while you're rocketing along at top speed, you got one hand on the steering wheel, and you just bring the other hand loose to yank on a lever.
That's the way, yeah. And if you don't do that, you're in all sorts of trouble.
I bet you are. Yes, and then the parachute just sort of leaps
into
action.
Come out. You're leaving the start line, you're in low gear, you've accelerated in low gear so fast, it's just unbelievable. Second gear, you're getting an idea what's going on at the track, and by this time you know that the run's either good or bad. You get into top gear, and this thing's later ears back, and she's just sailing on down there so fast you couldn't imagine it. And you know what sort of run you're really done by then. As you see this finish line come up, you have to pull the chutes under power, or else they don't come out properly. And the best feeling in the world is to have a good run, pull the chutes, and feel that whack where your eyeballs hit the windscreen. These things hit so hard. There's about 5 or 6 G's of deceleration. So, and actually causes retina dislodgement in races as they get older into their 50s and 60s.
Such is the force of the parachute, of the sudden deceleration.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your retinas can dislodge.
Yeah, absolutely, happened to a lot of big races over the years. Yeah, it's a big hit. The parachutes are actually made to pull up soft. They're not made to pull up hard. They're made to let a bit of the air. They're cross-form parachutes. They're not like drop chutes out of a plane. And they're made to, when you pull them, they come out. They have a little pilot chute blows out first, and that pulls the big chute out. And then when the big chute comes out, it's cross-form and lets a bit of air pass through it, so to soften the shock. But sometimes you wonder if they got it right. But because it gives you a good hard whack, and the thing is, it's a good feeling. It's not a bad feeling because by this time you've been flying, you've been going pretty quick.
Does your family come and watch you while you do this, Victor?
My family, like my wife and kids, they're all a part of our team for sure. They're my son Ben races. My wife Marie, she actually. Has he runs, sort of runs the team, I suppose you'd say, and keeps everyone happy because they all reckon I get grumpy on race day, but I know I don't.
Of course you don't. No. How about your mum? Did your mum ever watch you drag race?
Mum and Dad come to the racetrack once about 15 years ago and were disgusted and went home. So what are you doing that for? What are you doing that for? They used to know I was a bit of a hoon in my younger days, and I think they sort of thought that championship drag racing isn't street racing. And championship drag racing is as professional a sport as anything, and it's as professional as any motorsport out there, if not so more so in some areas. So
maybe so, but in the process you've just described, 1,000 different things could go wrong, and each one of those mistakes could be fatal, couldn't they? So that's a hard thing for a mother to watch.
Yeah. Well, she came out there and she sort of looked at it and she sort of watched one run, and she sort of, what are you doing that for? And I went out again, and then she said, I've got to go home. I'm not going to sit here and watch this. So
thing I think's interesting about you, Victor, is you have that side of you, this man who's dedicated to that fabulous adrenaline rush. And the other side of you is you're a tomato farmer. And when you think of that, you think of some guy who's meditative, who enjoys watching things slowly ripen on a vine to get something that's perfect and exquisite. You grew up as a tomato farmer.
Yeah, I grew up as a farmer on a family farm. I'm third generation, actually fourth generation on the property, third generation as a farmer on the property. And, I loved it. Had a great childhood, We got it's just north of Brisbane at Kalanga. We've got some creeks in the backyard, Grew up catching crabs, eating the food we ate, and, doing the old dad was a dawn-to-dusk farmer, hard-working guy. And, we used to always, before we went to school, had chores to do. When we got home, we had the chores to do, feed the potty calves and, pack tomatoes and all that sort of stuff. It was just a lifetime that we accepted, And I think that's where it's so good having my family around me here when I'm at the racetrack, having members of my family. My daughter's husband, he actually races too, and my grandsons are running junior dragsters now. They drag race as well, and so it is family. It all sort of stems from that. I think family and work ethic sort of make a successful life.
You're listening to Conversations with Richard Fidler on ABC Local Radio and the World Wide Web.
And today you're finding out what it's like to strap yourself into an extremely highly powered vehicle to shoot along at speeds reaching close to 400 kilometres per hour in the sport of drag racing. My guest is Victor Bray. He competes in the door slammer class of vehicle. That's how I describe it, as a class of vehicle.
Yeah, it is, door slammer class, yeah.
We were talking just before the headlines about your upbringing on a tomato farm. You and your dad actually bred an entirely new variety of tomato.
We did, yes. It was a challenge. There was no doubt about that. I had a funny sort of childhood. I was a great childhood up. I went to Gatton University, Queensland Agricultural College it was called in them days, and did a horticultural course there. Learned a bit about genetics and stuff like that. The motor racing thing didn't start till after I got back from that, and 17 licence, all the rest of it, how it goes. But I learned a lot about genetics on the farm. Dad was a very knowledgeable guy on tomatoes. He'd been growing them for nearly 40 years at that stage. And when you come in, if anyone understands tomato breeding, if they get involved and they say, we're going to breed a tomato, we're going to breed an F1 hybrid. F1 hybrids is when you have two perfect strain varieties, very generic varieties that have been bred for generations and are very true to kind, and then you breed those two together and you get the tomato that you want. It's sort of like natural genetic engineering, I suppose you'd say, but it happens naturally in the countryside daily, every day. So what we weren't happy with the quality of the tomato, eating quality we're talking about here. And yet there were some varieties that were coming out from Florida and other places throughout the world that had everything going for them as far as the bush itself went. So you had this variety, it was called Floridade, and it was actually a variety that had a short stumpy bush, short sharp crop, a big crop of big tomatoes. And one of the guys, I've got to say this bit, my dad would smack me in the gob if I didn't say this, but the salesman that first came out and tried to sell it to us when it first came out, we grew some, and he come back out and he said, "What did you think of them?" And the guy said, it's got a perfect bush, perfect wilt resistant, perfect disease resistant, great crop, all comes at once, everything's good for it. And Dad said, "But it tastes like cardboard." And the guy said, "Yeah, but that's all that's wrong with it." But hang on, we're growing them to eat, you know what I mean? That was a joke around the farm for years,
Big deal.
Yeah.
Tastes like cardboard, so what?
Yeah, so what? It's the only thing wrong with it. That was the basis for a fantastic variety in plant breeding. And then we had this other variety that we used to grow at home, and it was a really excellent eating variety, but it didn't have the attributes that you need to market a tomato in the marketplace. It was too soft to pack in with other tomatoes. The bush was tall and didn't get a lot of fruit on it. And the fruit wasn't very big, and it had things that were wrong. So, we talked about it for a while. Dad said, wouldn't it be great to be able to breed all the good things of that variety into all the good things on this variety, the taste and the quality of the product, and have them all together instead of having this tomato that had everything going for it except the fruit quality, have that bush and have the fruit quality. So we talked about it for a while. We looked into it, and we sort of talked back and forwards there while we're working on the farm. And yeah, we're going to have a go at this. We're going to have a red hot go. So Dad was keen. Like he had 40 years of experience in quality tomatoes, watching the varieties come through from the general marketplace. So we went out and got some advice from the DPI at the time. Chances of two guys in blue singlets and T-boots working on a farm getting a tomato variety in this way would have to be billions and billions to one. But
you did it.
But we had a bit of keenness on my side to do it, and Dad's knowledge of things. So went out the farm, we planted 10,000 bushes, and every couple of days Dad would go through and pull some out. So that 10,000 bushes, we grew up, got the seed off them, and then turned them into less and less and less till we got exactly what we wanted. And it took about 7 years to develop it, and we got a variety that had everything we wanted, and you could eat it. So,
and what did you call it?
We called it Rondelay. My dad's name was Ron. We just called it Rondelay, but it was very, very well accepted in the marketplace, and we still grow them today out there. Not as many as we used to, but we lost my dad in 2000. He was sort of the driving force behind the big acreage on the farm. But they were just so well accepted. My mum, who still runs the farm today, she actually won an award a few years ago called the Jaguar Award, which is an award put out by the Gourmet Traveller magazine, I believe, for excellence in produce. So it wasn't unrecognised, and we weren't unrecognised in the marketplace, and we had some very, very diehard customers. And the downside of it was, and I heard more than just one person say this, the only thing bad about buying Bray's tomatoes were that when they run out, you couldn't eat tomatoes. That was as good as it gets.
Victor, does one passion, the drag racing, does that balance the other passion, growing these beautiful tomatoes? Does the slowness of growing beautiful tomatoes, does that work to one side of your brain, if you like, and drag racing to the other? It
certainly used to for a long time. It was a sort of when I was about 25 to 35, I was working on the farm and doing a lot of time at night, evenings, keeping the race team. That's when I sort of went a bit semi-professional, I suppose, when I was a drag racer racing on my own dollar, on my own wages every week. Lucky enough for a company to come along, Castrol came along, and so here I am one week, I'm racing on my own dollar, trying to save up money and paying me bill down the speed shop every Friday afternoon, and, here the next couple of years I've got a international corporate sponsor, and I have to go out there and perform. I have to make things happen. I have to win races, and it was the day that I sort of won a few races, I suppose, just at the time when the sponsors come on board. I was very, very happy that I sort of realised I can do this, I can remember sitting at home bagging pumpkins, and we used to grow pumpkins at home, and packing tomatoes in the shed, and hearing the ads for the drags. I didn't even go to the drags in these days, and I was hearing the ads for the drags on the radio.
The ones that always end with, "Be there!"
Yeah, that's the ones. Started going down there a little bit, and my first enter in the races was a mate of mine, John Parker. We used to stand on the hill and used to bet $2 on which car was going to race when we started actually going to the drags. And anyway, they had this street dash thing where you could enter your street car at the drags, and we used to just drive me Chevy to the drags. And he used to go, "You could probably go in that." He's told me a couple of times. And one time he comes running up and he said, "You're in." And I said, "In what?" He goes, "You're in this round." So I went and jumped in the car, went out there, borrowed a helmet, chucked it, and I went out there and just loved it. Just loved the controlled atmosphere of championship drag race, and just really got me, where there's no BS anymore. All of a sudden, the lights measure how good you are, and you know how good you are, and you know whether you beat the guy. And that was really, really attractive to me when I realised that, this is good fun. Over the next year, in 1983, I think it was, I won my first race, and Lex Swain was a reporter at the time, a journalist, and he walked up and wanted to talk to me, and I sort of went home that night thinking to myself, you can do this. This is fun. This is really fun. And, these people want to talk to you now, and, now you're going it. You've beaten I beat some big names that day. I was a nobody. I was a busted-ass nobody. And I beat some big names that day, got to the end of the race and won the final, and it was a feeling just unbelievable. So that's probably what really bit deep, and then from then on I sort of just progressed up through the ranks, I suppose, and the rest has sort of been history.
Okay, well, let's go back a little bit. How old were you when you got your first car?
I think round about 8 or 9. I mean, round about there, somewhere there, 9, 10, something. I'm not real sure. I can't really remember back that far.
I've got a 9-year-old son, and the idea that he might drive a car, admittedly, we live in the burbs, and you were living out in the bush is a different thing entirely. Could you reach the pedals and do all that at the age of 9?
Yeah, it was a Ford Prefect, and I used to drive Dad's car around before that. I've got grandsons now that have been driving for 2 years, 9 years old, they're 2 years into it, they've got their own cars and stuff, and they thrash around the paddock. A little bit different from living in the suburbs, though, because we live in a lot of acreage. Yeah, we had 600 acres. A lot of it's very flat ground with not many trees on it. It's great for paddock thrashing, so we call them paddock thrashers. And my first car was an old Ford Prefect, bought off a family friend up the road, $30, which at the time was just, wow, someone's got $30.
Wow.
There's two things I really remember about that whole early, getting involved in motorsport and getting involved in cars, I suppose, and a passion. Dad was a real hands-on farmer. If something broke on the farm, we fixed it. We had to fix it ourselves with what we had on the farm. So that was just how it was. We had welders and stuff and old parts off old tractor. We just had to fix it. I distinctly remember Mum said it was when I was less than 5 and we were sitting under the bottom of a old Chev truck, and Dad had popped the bearing out. I must have just crawled under there for a bit of fun. And I remember Dad pulled one of the bearings off the conrods inside the truck, and he pulled the bearing out of it. Didn't have a lot of dollars and didn't have any new bearings to put in there, so he cut a bit of leather, put the leather inside the conrod, pushed it back on, tightened it back up, and that truck's still going today. So, there's a lot.
Still a bit of leather.
Yeah, well, it's not. We don't run it. It's still at home there. It ran for years after that, and it's still sitting at home. I'm sure you can get in, chuck a battery in, start her up. The next thing that I remembered about actually going out and working on cars is this Ford Prefect. I must have been pretty young because I didn't know much about him at the time. I was amazed that, I never really had a look under one. And I used to think to myself, there must be some fantastic stuff up under there, to be able to go like it goes and change gears. And I wonder who invented all that stuff. That's fantastic. And one day I burnt a valve out in the car and I couldn't drive it anymore. She was leaking a bit of water. And my dad says to me, we'll just fix it one day. And I'm sort of going, we're going to what? We're going to fix it. And we pulled the head off it and put a new valve in there and lapped the valve in and got it all working out. She's going like it was before because it lost a ton of power, see? All of a sudden it's going like it was before. And I just thought, this is me. This has been fixed. You mean that
was a really big moment for you?
Massive moment.
That you could fix it.
Yeah, you can fix it.
You could thrash a car, have it sort of...
do what you want with it.
Do what you want. Yeah. It could go wrong.
When it goes broke,
but you can fix it
up. And then you can do it all again. That was me. And between then and when I went to college when I was 16 years old, me and the mate next door, a bloke by the name of Glenn Hallett, we went through 52 cars. So
52 cars?
52 paddock thrashers, we called them, yeah. So
where are they now? In the paddock still?
No, we got in trouble once. We had to clean them up. As time went by, his property was getting sold, and we had a lot of them over in his property. I used to get yelled at all the time by my grandpa and me dad and mum and everyone about leaving them laying around the paddock because I used to leave them where they stopped. But I probably had 15 or 20 around our joint, and then the rest were over at Glenn's. One day we got in trouble. We had to go clean them up from the council. So we went and pulled them. We had no idea how many we had, and we put them all in a big line. There was 55 Chevys, Fords, FJ Holdens, EKs, FBs, you name it, they were there. And they were there by the... And when we finally got them, we're talking about a 400-acre paddock here. Went and got the tractor from the farm, snug them all up in a big long line, and because someone was going to take them away, and there was 52 cars between the two back paddocks. So... She was fun. The FJ bonnet's perfect. See, what you do with FJ bonnet, you turn her upside down, get a rope, tie it on the back of your FJ, right? Take the bonnet off the FJ, then it stays cooler, and you turn the bonnet upside down with the round bit at the front, and you sit in the bonnet, right? And the rope onto that, and you get your mates to cart you around the farm in it, right? And they're all around the paddock. How we ever never broke bones. A couple of guys broke bones, but how we ever didn't get beat up more than we did, I don't know. And it was fun. It was good times, I remember. And, and then it was just come as natural to fix the cars up. That's what we do. We started getting more interested in fixing the cars up. Then driving them was fun, but fixing them was just as much fun. So,
champion drag racer Victor Bray is my guest in conversation this morning. Victor, you said you're quite a very close family. Tell me about meeting your wife, Marie.
She was a local girl. I had a group of friends up in Cleveland. I didn't have a lot. When we were growing up at home, when I went to Gatton College, I was a real farm boy, you know what I mean? I never, in them days where we live at Kalanga was out in the sticks a little bit, it was a long way. You had to drive a long way down dirt roads to get to where we were. So we never had a lot to do uptown. We used to go to church every Sunday. That's one thing we used to do, and that was sort of the big day out, And every now and then we'd go to the beach, and because Dad was a hard-working farmer, and we used to have fun. Our fun was on the farm, We used to make our own fun horses and whatever else we used. Not that I was ever a big horse man, I can tell you. 1 horsepower don't cut it, mate,
Not fast.
No. And after I got back, girls, cars, there was plenty of reasons to leave the farm. So, and I sort of met Marie. She was a friend of a group of friends that we sort of knew up in Kalanga. And, just she couldn't help herself, and goes. No, we sort of knew each other for a little while, and then started going out.
She's sitting next to my producer. I just saw a raised eyebrow.
Yeah, I bet.
Victor, starting, as you said, drag racing, obviously it was something that was addictive right from the start for you. There's the issue of the crowd as well, and that's got to be a large part of the pleasure, is having a roaring crowd there. But there's sort of two sides to that, because a large part of the crowd wants to see you have a prang, don't they?
A large part of motorsport crowds probably like the spectacle of an accident. There's no doubt about that. And that's probably part of the attraction of motor racing all over the world.
It's in the ads for drag racing.
Yeah,
You're always seeing things going wrong in the ads.
And that's what they do.
Right, yeah.
We've had accidents over the years with nothing as serious. Some of my friends, I've had friends killed in accidents. I've had friends with severe injuries in accidents that have changed their life, and it does happen in drag racing, but it can happen walking across the road. The safety aspects of drag racing are controlled by ANDRA. I mean, if we go to a race event, there's going to be 60 Group 1 cars, which are the professional classes, and say 300 sportsman classes, which are the guys that don't they still have just as much fun as we have, but they're not in the heads-up, multi-million-dollar operation. So to control those 500 or 600 people at the racetrack, there would be probably 50 people that are keeping an eye on safety. And
that's true. I suppose the point I was making was about the crowd. I mean, you ever look at them as they're looking at you? Because I don't suppose the crowd are your
with
friends.
With a snarly look and go,
well, yeah,
you
go, you
friends.
bastards.
No.
You really want to see me end up in a flaming wreck, don't you?
No, the crowd is what's given me the opportunity to race at a level that I couldn't have even dreamt of when I was 17, or when I was 20, or when I was 25 or 30. I couldn't have even dreamt of racing at the level I've been able to race at in my career. And the fact that the crowd, I was just a lucky guy. The crowd liked what I was doing. They liked the Chevy, liked the burnouts. What I liked doing, they liked watching. So, I was very, very lucky in that respect. And, I mean, the fans nowadays even, and, especially the younger fans that are at the racetrack for the first time, and the look on their face, I still consider myself today Joe Bloggs, blue singlet, tomato farmer, Vic, chipping tomatoes out in the middle of the farm. And I don't feel it any different to that now than what I did then, and I never, ever have for 1 minute in my life ever. And when you see a kid walk up to you and just go quiet and just get this massive look on his face about, wow, I'm talking to Victor Bray. I still don't understand it, but if that's what makes him happy, I love doing it. I love talking to him. I love being around him.
Well, I'm looking at a man who's all in one piece, and aside from the missing fingertip from a merchandising tent accident, nonetheless, there was a time when your car spun out of control into a crowd in Melbourne. Tell me about that story. What happened that day?
It was as much their fault as mine, to tell you the truth, because they were told to move back 3 times by the police, and they didn't move back anyway because...
Was it in a stadium or was it on the street?
It was in a stadium. Right. No, it was in a stadium. Yeah, it was in a big race event down there. And these cars are 100% unpredictable, so never trust them. And that's why they have safety rules. That's why they have roll cages, and that's why they have all this stuff. Anyway, we've done we're going to do a burnout demonstration, which we do a fair bit of. And, you're not really drag race, you're just doing a demonstration to show people the horsepower of the car. And we're down at the racetrack, and there was about 30,000 people there, and they'd surged forward pretty hard up against the side of the track, and the police drove down and put them all away. I probably had 15 metres, and then when I started the car again, they surged forward again, so they drove down again and made them move back again. The second time, they didn't surge forward much at all until I started doing a burnout. Then they surged forward. Well, you could bet. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of burnout demonstrations that I've done with no problem. This one had to lose control. There was a bit of a crown on the road. Tyres just hooked a little bit funny, lost control. The car went into a slide. I turned it all off, and I was sliding completely sideways around 100 mile an hour, looking out my driver's side window, just heading for a bunch of people. And then I heard them all, flattened them all, got out of the car, thought it was a horrific scene to me at the time. There was fire. I ran over a fire extinguisher station. There was fire extinguishers going off, and it was a crazy time. Anyway, I got out. Anyway, the people all started getting up off the ground. They were just dusting themselves off, and I'm thinking, oh, no, there's one guy that I could see had a sore leg. He wouldn't get up. So I walked up, and he's sort of rolling around and looking at the ground. And I walked up to him and said, oh, you all right, mate? And he's turned around, and I was absolutely distressed at this time. He looks up at me, and he looks at my eyes, and he goes, oh, Victor Bray, I've always wanted to meet you. I felt like the biggest a-hole anyone's ever been. I felt about that big, like you could have just come and seen me, eh? That gave me a massive new outlook on safety. I would never, ever, ever, ever be involved in anything like that ever again. I never have been, right to this day.
There's been a couple of times when you've actually pulled other drivers out of burning cars, Victor.
Yeah, a mate of mine, Zap, he come roaring down through the traps there one day, and I was pulled up. he came running and I seen his car catch fire, the flames leaping out the windows, all in the cab. I knew he was in trouble. He managed to pull the car up. I walked over to him, I opened the door, he pulled his fire extinguisher and basically extinguished most of the fire, but he was still smouldering. Fire crew hadn't got there, so I stuck my head in, looked in his eyes, said, "You're right," and he goes, "No, I'm fine. So I jumped back out of the way and held the door open for him, and he wasn't moving. So I stuck my head back in, and he was out of it, He'd been obviously without oxygen for the last little while because of the smoke and the fire in the car, and even though he'd answered me, because he's a pretty tough guy, Zap, he's a tough dude, and he, so I unbarred him and pulled him out of the car, and then he was, I'm glad I did, because that car was still burning, started burning again, and he was smouldering, and he didn't know where he was.
My guest in conversation at the moment is Victor Bray. Victor is an international drag racing champion who's held several world records and is one of the most popular figures in the sport of drag racing. It's funny, the worst accident it sounds like you've experienced wasn't at the track at all. It was on the road. One day way back in with your family in the car.
Yeah, we had a very serious head-on collision at Brunswick Heads in the late 70s, I think it was. And Marie was, severely injured in the accident. And I had a little bit of injury, and I had my eldest daughter, Kelly, was in the back seat. So we were very lucky that we all got out of that. But Marie took a long time to get over her injuries, but it wasn't a pleasant time for us. No, it was pre-seatbelt days too, so it wasn't good. You
were lucky that your little daughter survived. It was
she didn't have a scratch on her for some unknown reason. It happened about 2 to 3 kilometres out of Brunswick Heads on the Pacific Highway. Kelly was in the back seat, and at Brunswick Heads, I just pulled up the side of the road. I said, "I was too dangerous, her laying on the seat like that," and I put 2 pillows, one each side of her, and tucked her in between the 2 pillows on the floor behind the driver's seat. And that did that less than 5 minutes before the accident. And she just got up and said, "Oh, what's going on, Dad?"
Who was it that struck you? Who was it that struck the car?
Just 2 guys in the car. They'd been drinking, and they just went to sleep at the wheel. They weren't drinking. They just went to sleep at the wheel and come across the road at me. And I thought I'd missed them, and they went right off the side of the road, but he hit a guidepost, woke up and turned back into Marie's side of the car. And, it was combined. I was doing about, 60 mile an hour, 50 or 60, and they were doing about the same, if not a bit more. So it was a pretty... So we were lucky in a couple of areas. There was a couple of truckies there, knew what they were doing, had some gear on board to save Marie. The tyre had come up inside the car and crushed her legs up against the seat, and she was sort of trapped in there. So.
I wonder if after you have an accident where it makes you a little, gun shy, is the word car shy for a little bit afterwards?
Oh, it does, definitely. I mean, when you see accidents and that, recently a friend of mine had a severe incident in the United States where some people were killed at a demonstration, and most people had heard about that. And, just since then, we go and revise everything we do, We just make sure that we're doing the right thing and things are right. And it just has to be like that, especially when you get your family around you. I mean, my whole family's involved in drag racing, and my son Ben's a champion, and he races, and my grandsons are racing, and it's all about cars, and just try to instill safety in everybody. And because like I say, cut my finger off helping a mate set up a trailer. It's a dangerous world we live in, and we're involved in a dangerous sport, so we do the very best we can. We take advice from everybody that we consider we can take advice from.
What gives you the winning edge as a driver? Is it being the driver, or is it being the bloke who's looking after the engine before it and is engineering and making sure everything is exactly right?
Well, most of the guys I race against at the moment, my son Ben would probably say at the moment, no one's my success because I've had a lean few events. But I think when it all comes down to it, in drag racing, the driver has to do his job. It's not a prolonged job like it is an endurance race. But if you don't, you've got to be very, very good at it. You've got to be very, very good at it to win races. But the setup of the car is ultra critical. These cars have got so much power, so much adjustability. What we do, we run different amounts of fuel at different points on the track. We run different amounts of ignition timing at different points on the track, which gives us some different amounts of power. We run different gear ratios, and we run different clutch settings. Like I said before, the clutch actually burns up as you leave the start line. You watch a dragster or something leaving the start line, it burns up in the top in a door slammer. The clutch dust roaring out the back of the car because you can't leave the start line with 3,500 horsepower, so you have to adjust how fast that comes in. So it's probably about 50-50. I'd say if you went to Formula One, it'd lean heavily towards the car setup and the budget. Driver has to be skillful, of course, but in drag racing, he has to get his job really right, or else the setup don't matter at all, whereas I think in some of them other things they can fudge it pretty good.
You had a bit of a falling out with Brett Stevens, another big name in drag racing.
Oh, beauty. What
happened there? You're happy to talk about that?
Oh, yes and no. Me and Brett were friends for a long time, and had a bit of a falling out, some disagreements on some stuff, and never really got on. He had a successful racing career. He come into the sport and come in big and bold, and he's a different sort of person to me. Like I'm a ex-tomato farmer, and he was a flamboyant type. So. Well, I mean, we don't. When I say, well, I mean, not like we're having punch-ups every weekend or nothing like that, but we just don't get on. And he did some things I didn't like, and I suppose in his voice, he was giving his opinion. I did some things he didn't like, but we were good friends once. We both had the same interest in drag racing and stuff, and have a lot of probably respect for his driving ability and stuff that he did in the car. But I suppose in the long run, I don't know, just one of them things, mate. We never got on. We used to get on great, but we just don't get on. He's done a lot. He's actually retired now, so there's not too much going on out there anymore.
You come from 3 generations of tomato farmers, and now it sounds like you've got a dynasty of 3 generations of you, your son, your grandson. You say, how old's your grandson?
I think he's 12 now. He starts high school this year. So.
Geez, he started drag racing at 12?
Yeah. He's been racing for a while now.
At 12?
Yeah, they can race at 8. They can start drag racing at 8 years old in what they call junior dragsters, which is a entry-level car powered by a Briggs & Stratton motor. And as they get older and older, they can allowed to go faster and faster.
So it's like go-karts, in other words. It's like
but they're very. What it does, it teaches them respect for authority. Teaches them about the Christmas tree. Again, that Christmas tree is a critical part of drag racing, and teaches them about that. Teaches them about respect for and authority for the people that operate the start line. Teaches them an awful lot about safety, and which is good to teach them that early. And it teaches them about how disciplined they have to be to actually win a race, because out there's probably 50 junior dragsters at each event, and it is hard to win. And you get some parents. I mean, it's like you don't get the soccer mum thing, but I mean, there's some parents that are willing to tip or have the ability to tip some more money in than others, but definitely doesn't seem to reflect in the winning. It's more about the kid's attitude towards it. And you got 8 years old, 9, 10. You got to get out of those cars when you're 17. Ben was a junior dragster champion for many, many years before he started door slammer racing. And it's. I'll be honest with you, and they'll all come and hammer me at the next event. But they take a fair bit of time up at the track. But in the long run, I think the junior dragster programs really worked well for drag racing.
Victor, it's been great to speak with you today and find out what it's like to be a human projectile, really. I mean, that's what you do as a drag racer, is to know what that's like to go from nothing to 400 Ks in a couple of seconds. It's a fascinating thing. Great to meet you, and thank you so much for being with me in conversation today.
Love being there, mate. Love being there. Let's just hope we can keep going a bit longer and grow them tomatoes and get them cars running, and everyone stays safe. It's been a lot of fun. Been very lucky.
Thanks, Victor. And thanks very much to Tim Hedden, who emailed us about Victor and said, Victor is a tomato farmer, drag racer, hell of a nice guy with plenty of time for fans. Sums you up pretty well, Victor, I think. Nice thing to say.
Yeah, it must be one of me fans. Like I say, family and fans, mate, what makes the world go round. Family, fans and sponsors. My world of drag racing.
Thanks, Victor. That's
See you, buddy.
Great.
On ABC Local Radio. Conversations.